Genesis chapter 7, and it spoke of the global flood. It wasn't really so much Noah's flood. It was Noah's boat, but it was God's flood. The world had become sinful to the point the Bible says God repented that he had made man. And so God decided to start over, so to speak, in many respects, with Noah and his family. Noah, his 3 sons, and their wives. 8 people on the ark. Is there evidence that suggests a global flood? Well, there are marine sediments on all continents. There are some people that will tell you there was not, and there's not enough water on earth to cover Mount Everest. Well, all I have to tell you is there are marine fossils on top of Mount Everest. So whether it was much lower and was thrust up, or it got covered with water, what I can tell you is there are marine fossils on top of Mount Everest. That's all that needs to be said. Furthermore, as we look here, the geologic column has not completely eroded away. This is something we'll talk more about in our next session. However, the geologic column is of particular interest because even at today's estimated rather slow erosion rates, the geologic column should have eroded many times over. Erosion eroded many times over within the time frame that many old Earth scientists, those that believe it's billions of years old, say that it is. Then another point is articulated skeletal fossils extending through multiple layers. Articulated is just a fancy word for the fossils are still together. In other words, entire organisms buried where their dead bodies, the fossils that remain rather, no longer bodies, no longer organic material. However, you find that the fossils extend through multiple layers. They say that those layers represent thousands and millions of years. Well, how does their skeletal remains, how do they protrude through these millions of years? That proves a bit of a problem. There are some fish skeletons that go through several layers. The interesting thing is we know from experimentation in the scientific community that fish skeletons typically become disarticulated within 6 days if they are not scavenged, if they're not eaten by others. What do you mean? It only takes about 6 days of a dead fish floating around in the water before its head comes off. How many of you have seen fish heads? Not that the redneck's cut off after cleaning the fish, nothing wrong with that. But how many of you have walked along the beach and you actually find a fish head but not the rest of the body with it? Happens all the time. For these fossils to be articulated, it means they had to be buried shortly after the death of the organism. Particularly with fish, within 6 days of the death of the organism for the entire skeletal structure to still be together, not over millions of years. Furthermore, massive deposits separated by several layers, separating many dinosaur fossils from their food source by, in the estimation that they give of the layers, several million years. Well, that makes sense then. What killed the dinosaurs? They must have starved to death because their food was in a different layer. Paraconformities. These are missing layers that just are not even there in many places of the geologic column that are found elsewhere. And they say, well, they eroded away, but the problem with that is that there are still flat contact lines. The geologic column, the contact lines are relatively flat throughout the globe. Does that suggest that they were laid down over millions and millions and millions of years? Folks, what does erosion do? Have you been around any erosion? Have you ever plowed a field and then watched and saw the rain literally dig trenches right out of it? How can you have flat contact lines? You have in many places what they estimate to be millions of years of the geologic column simply missing, but flat contact lines above and below. Say, well, they just eroded. Well, no, they didn't. Now, this is very interesting. Global corresponding chalk lines throughout the geologic column. This is the checkmate right here, and we will talk about this more in our next session, most likely as well. global corresponding chalk layers. Do you know how the chalk layers are formed? They are formed from marine fossil specimens, and they correspond in the geologic column globally. Have you ever heard of the White Cliffs of Dover? That's an area where the chalk is particularly thick. But globally, there are corresponding chalk layers, which lends to the fact that at some point, the globe at the same time had to be underwater. These are some of the things we will consider. I want to begin with a prophecy. I'm going to read it in the Bible. I'm putting it on the screen because with our video, it comes up full screen when we do that. And for folks that will be watching it later, it'll be helpful to have it on a slide. But I would like you to look in your Bibles. If you have the seminar Bible, you can open with me to 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 3. 2 Peter chapter 3, and we look here in verse 3. 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 3. It says, knowing this first, that there shall come in the what days? Last days. Now, this is not so much a prophecy study, but we will be covering some prophecy in it. That shouldn't be a surprise to you, because our ministry name is Creation to what? To Revelation. That's right. We see the two as closely linked. You see, I believe the entire Bible, from in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, until the very last verse of the book of Revelation that says, the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ be with you all, amen. I believe this book has been given to us by God. I believe God has presided over it and protected it down through the centuries. And I believe it's the Word of God. And so one of the things that I've noticed is that there are no two books that are more distorted, more misunderstood, and more attacked and more made fun of in the entire Bible than its first book and its last book. Creation and Revelation, yes or no? Yeah, that's interesting. And so while we focus on the whole Bible, our ministry is creation to Revelation with the cross in the center, and I'm sharing with you a prophecy about creation right here, whether you realize it or not. We're in the last days. And I guarantee you that there are scoffers. In fact, tonight, if you are a scoffer, we welcome you to our program. We are encouraged that you're here. We're encouraged that there are signs we're living in the last days. We welcome you as a fulfillment of prophecy if you're a scoffer tonight. Walking after their own lust and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, that's just a term the Bible uses a lot for death. Since the fathers died, previous generations passed on. All things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. So they scoff in the last days, and they say all things continue as they were since the beginning of the creation. I propose that this is a prophecy that in part, at least, if not exclusively, at least in part, deals with the number one strongest principle taught in evolutionary theory today, and it's called the uniformitarian principle. That all things continue as they were since the beginning of creation. Therefore, you have millions and millions and millions of years that build up these fossils in the earth's crust, they would say. But notice, what are these scoffers denying? Verse 5, for this they willingly are ignorant of. Now, ignorant, that can sometimes be used as a derogatory word today. Not so here. I remember one particular time there was a Yankee. Came down from up north to Mississippi. Now, folks, God loves Yankees, and we're supposed to try to. Little southern humor there for you. And this Yankee was working in Purvis, Mississippi. And he came back one day from town, and he was so flustered, he couldn't even talk. Finally, when he got settled down, he had come to find out he had gotten an altercation at the gas station with a redneck. And what had him so upset, he said, is that ignorant called me ignorant. You ain't nothing but an ignorant Yankee. Why don't you go back where you came from, is what the guy told. He said, he can't even say it right. That ignorant called me ignorant. Boy, for days, that just bugged him to death. The ignorant called him, well, here it's not being used derogatorily, although my redneck brother in Mississippi probably would use it that way. Not literal brother, the southern heritage idea, but nonetheless, we look here and it says this. This they are willingly ignorant of. There's something that this community of scoffers is going to be ignorant of that claim that all things continue from the beginning of creation. That by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, verse 6, whereby the world that then was being overflowed with water, what happened to it? Perished. That's talking about the flood in Noah's day. It says there will be scoffers in the last days, saying everything continues like it does from the beginning of creation, and they're willingly ignorant of the global water catastrophe. That's what prophecy says will happen in the last days. Question, do we see a fulfillment of that prophecy in the academic communities largely throughout the world today? Yes or no? You say, what could they be willingly ignorant of? Marine sediments on all the continents. The geologic column hasn't eroded away. Articulated skeletal fossils extending through multiple layers. Massive deposits separated by several layers. Paraconformities and flat contact lines. Global corresponding chalk lines throughout the geologic column. And many, many others. That's what they're choosing to be willingly ignorant of, whether or not that's what you realize is taking place. Now, Jesus used this as an example of the last days in the end times, the days of Noah. He said, for as the days that were before the what? Flood. Did Jesus speak of the flood as a literal historical event? Yes or no? It says they were eating and drinking, marrying and given in marriage until the day that Noah, that's a variant spelling, entered into the ark and knew not until the flood came and took them all away, killed them. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Not only did Jesus tell us that the flood literally happened, that it literally took place, that people, their lives came to an end that were not ready, he then equates that to his second coming, yes or no? That makes it a very important issue to our Savior, I believe. Now, as we get into the issue here this evening, we'll look at our next point. Was the flood global? Folks, there are people that will tell you that if the flood really happened, it was only regional. Do you know the number one reason they have to hold on to the idea that the flood was regional? Because if there was a global flood approximately 4,400 years ago, and every animal that lived on land that was not in Noah's ark was destroyed, then evolutionary theory would have had to start over when they got off the boat. It would kill, destroy, obliterate the teaching of deep time evolution. They must fight the idea of a global water catastrophe to the death, because it is the death of evolutionary teaching. The need for an ark. If the flood was only a regional event, as I said last night, they wouldn't have needed an ark. They could have migrated elsewhere. You can walk from here to South America in 6 months, turn around and walk back. They took 120 years to build the ark. They could have walked the distance from here to South America and back 240 times in the length of time it took them to build the ark. Furthermore, if the flood would have been regional, you wouldn't have needed a boat to put animals on. Because when there are regional floods today that drowned animals in one part of a continent, the animals elsewhere repopulated, and it doesn't take that long for it to happen. Yes or no? The Bible intends for us to believe it was global. The testimony of Jesus and elsewhere in Scripture, it's not just Genesis. And it's not just a couple of the references of Jesus himself, but throughout the Bible that refer to Noah and the flood as a literal historical event that destroyed everyone that was not ready to get on the boat. The depth and duration of the flood. The Bible tells us this flood lasted for months. Possibly we'll look into that a little more in the next session. My friends, do regional floods, when you see them on the news, do they last for months? Or for days that sometimes that only barely add up to weeks typically? Well, why? Well, I'll tell you why. My dad helped me understand this one. My dad's done a lot of things over the years. Right now, he's road manager for Stone County, Mississippi, not Missouri. We have a Stone County, too. And he's the county road manager. He did some commercial plumbing. He was maintenance superintendent in International Paper. He likes to go get a new job every 5-6 years and climb up to the top and be the boss there, and then he gets bored and quits and goes start over somewhere else, does the same thing. And when he was in plumbing, he used to tell a joke. It wasn't really that funny, but he sure liked it. It was funnier to him than to the people he told it to. He never was much concerned, worried about impressing folks. None of us need to be worried about that anyway. And when people would ask him about plumbing, he'd say, well, there's 3 things everybody needs to know to be a really good plumber. And they would always say, well, what's that? Well, number 1, payday's on Friday. Number 2, water runs downhill. And then he would stop, and they would always go, well, what's number 3? So I don't know, I was never a really good plumber. The reason that it proves that the Bible intends for us to believe that this flood was global and that it lasted months and months is that a regional flood, the reason they only last a few days is because water runs downhill. And so it goes somewhere else. The reason the global flood lasted months and months is because there was nowhere else for it to go. The rainbow promise. If it was a regional flood, then God's breaking his rainbow promise every time there's a regional flood. He said he would never destroy the earth again with water. He meant the whole earth. Not that there wouldn't be regional floods. And also, and we're going to look at this in our next series, our next lesson, the legends of a global flood in cultures all over the planet. Many of them have this legend. Now let's move on. Textbooks say the earth is billions of years old. Allow me to illustrate. Check this out. Humans are an important part of the earth environment. Together with every other living organism, humans probably evolved from bacteria that lived more than 4 billion years ago. See? So there you have bacteria, and there's you and your jogging suit. See? That's simple. Makes perfect sense. One of the interesting things is whether you realize it or not. And yeah, I do make fun of evolution sometimes, I admit. But it is logical. It's just wrong. You say, what do you mean, logical? Well, if you determined and you believed that the only way that you could be here is that there wasn't a God, and so bigger organisms and more advanced organisms had to form from smaller, going from less advanced to more advanced is a logical way to think. This happens to be wrong. Let's say you were digging in 100 years from now. Let's say you dug where dogs were disposed of after, the pounds kill them or whatever. Sad stuff. And 100 years later, you don't know what's happening, and you dig along. And at the top, you find a dog that's got a big skull. You think, that's a big one. I'll set him here. As you go along, you find very different sizes, sometimes together, sometimes separating. And down at the very bottom, you find a little bitty dog skull from a Chihuahua they put down. then maybe you say, okay, what's a logical way to arrange these? From smallest to largest. That would make sense. Maybe these small ones started out and then you have these big ones. It's a logical way to think. It's just wrong. There are some very smart people that are smarter than me, smarter than most of you, that believe in evolution. And they see logic in it. Doesn't make it right. Allow me to illustrate. Let's say you had a pond in your backyard, and down at the bottom you had some little bacteria, and then there were some worms, because that's on the bottom down there. I don't know if there's worms at the bottom of the water, but fish like them when I put them on the bottom of the water. And then, there's some little bitty fishes and some bigger fishes, and there's some ugly catfish, and then some nicer looking fish a little higher. And then on the top, there's some little ducks that swim around. And your next door neighbor is having some work done in his yard with a bulldozer, and the bulldozer gets out of control, busts through the fence, grunts through the dam of your pond, and pushes the dam right into where all of those little creatures live, and buries the pond and destroys it. And 1,000 years later, somebody digs up your pond, and they go, look at this. There's little bitty bacteria down here, and then these small organisms like worms are above them. And then these little fish are here, and then these more primitive-looking fish, and then these bigger fish, and up here at the top there are birds. So the bacteria must have come before the worms, which must have come before. It's logical, it's just wrong. As you look at the layering in the geologic column, which we're really going to spend our time on next lesson, you actually have a layering system. It doesn't mean all those animals at different layers lived at different times. No, not at all. And we will talk about that. Notice what this biology book has to say. You are an animal and share a common heritage with earthworms. Bless your heart. I feel bad for you. Notice this one. The earth is thought to have formed about 4.6 billion years ago. It was very different from today's earth. About 3.9 billion years ago, Earth had cooled enough for water vapor to condense, and Earth was, for the first time, experiencing violent rainstorms. Eventually, the accumulated rainfall formed Earth's oceans. It is in these oceans about 3.5 billion years ago that scientists believe the first living organisms appeared. These are the things that are taught to young people in the public schools today. Origin of life. On an Earth history calendar, it is now sometime in April. There is still no life, but swirling in the waters of the oceans is a bubbling broth of complex chemicals. Some of them are carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic acids, the chemicals of life. However, the process from a complex chemical soup to a living organism is very slow. Yeah, you have absolutely nothing living, and for it to turn into something is very slow. It takes eternity, and it still hadn't happened. Not on its own. Because you have to have DNA at the beginning to have life. You can't get over the fact that at the very basic beginning, you have to have DNA, and DNA is information, and without intelligence, you can't have information. Checkmate. An introduction to biological evolution. This is a college text currently being used. This here represents the geologic column going way, way, way down. It says, the gathering of cosmic gases under gravity's pull created Earth some 4.6 billion years ago. Time's vastness has made time evolution's partner. See, the argument behind evolution that is not so scientific is, if you wait long enough, anything can happen. I don't believe it. I believe there are scientific principles that the Creator has put into place. And no matter how long you wait, those scientific principles cannot be violated. You can wait for all eternity, but if you don't have DNA in place, you don't have life on earth. And you can put all you want in a dead ocean and let it float around and think it's going to turn into life eventually. And you could wait for all eternity. But if there's no DNA put there by an intelligence, it can't happen. The age of the earth. Poor old earth. Isaiah 51:6 tells us that the earth will wax old like a garment. But the question is, how old is the earth? Well, some people will debate whether the earth was already here at the beginning of creation week. I do have my opinions, but I'm not going to bog down on that tonight. What I will tell you is that as we look at the biblical timeline, although some people add the genealogies up to about 10,000 years, I'm more in tune with the one that goes back about 6,000 years. Creation week, about 6,000 years ago. The flood, there's a picture of the water to represent that, about 4,400 years ago. About 2,000 years ago, Jesus came. Here we are today, and the end of the world is coming soon with Jesus' return. Very soon. You know, if you were looking at the earth as a clock, and you figured all that time, and here we are, and Jesus is coming, we're like at 11:59. The clock's about to strike midnight. The midnight cry, Jesus is coming back. He said, as it was in the days of Noah, so will it be in the days when the Son of Man appears. Evolutionist timeline says this was the universe about 20 billion years ago, right after it was nothing and it was something, and then it exploded and became everything. I'm going to look in our box. This box, last night, had absolutely nothing in it. There were a few questions. I took those out. At one seminar, someone played a trick on me. They brought a toy dinosaur and dropped it in the box. I thought that was pretty clever. Little toy plastic dinosaur, dropped it in the box. So, okay, did anything come in? Oh my, it formed a dinosaur. Evolution really is true. Well, they say that nothing exploded and became everything. Last night, a young lady put absolutely nothing in this box for us, and it's still here. And it still hadn't blown up and become everything. If you missed that last night, you don't know what we're talking about. That's okay. We might review it at some point. Then about 4.6 billion years ago, gases and particles began to condense through some kind of non-understood gravitational force, and the earth kind of lumped up. And 3 million years ago, Grandpa stood up on his hind legs and looked around. That's the evolutionist timeline. There's a big difference between the two. A huge difference between the two. And what we believe on this actually matters according to the Scriptures. Now, there are 4 major icons of old age. Supposed things that people believe prove the earth is billions and billions of years old, or life on it is millions and millions of years old. 1 is dinosaurs. 2 is oil. 3, and of course, other natural resources, petrified wood, and the Grand Canyon, including the geologic column. We're going to look at these very quickly tonight. We're going to start back at the beginning. This is where a lot of people start. In the beginning were Dr. Seuss books. In the beginning for kids, that's some of the first books that get read to them, yes or no? Millions of American kids, this is the beginning for them. And here's what they see. From fossils, dinosaur teeth, eggs, and bones got stuck in the muck, and that muck turned to stone. These fossils are old. They are dusty and worn because they were made long before you were born. Not hundreds of years, not thousands of years, but millions of years long before you were born. The indoctrination starts young now. Say, Dr. Seuss is harmless. That's not harmless. I don't know about the rest of it. I haven't read Dr. Seuss in a long time. Other books for kids will say things like millions of years ago, dinosaurs and other prehistoric animals lived on Earth. Today, scientists keep learning more about prehistoric animals by studying fossils. So when did the dinosaurs live? Well, my friends, if the Bible is true, and I believe it is, I have no other conclusion but that man and dinosaurs were on the earth at the same time. That man is still here, that dinosaurs are not. That likely the global flood had something to do with that. If you study what is coming out about the dinosaurs, and they're learning that quite likely today's climate would not have worked well for them. Furthermore, Scripture indicates there was a different type of climate on earth prior to the flood. A lot of speculation about that, but let's put it this way. The Bible tells us that a mist came up from and watered the earth. They didn't have rain like we do today. That's why the rain was such a big deal at Noah's day. It hadn't happened yet. That's my studied opinion. The next point is that after the flood, for the first time on earth, you had rainbows, yes or no? Something so cataclysmic took place on this earth that it destroyed every living land animal that wasn't on that boat and changed the climate of the planet. We've heard about Triceratops and all these flying dinosaurs, and of course lots of science fiction movies still come out with all this kind of stuff in it today, and even the dinosaurs that live in the water, and people speculate whether some of them might still be around. Oh, somebody saw it, oh, somebody didn't, oh, somebody got a picture, oh, it was a fake, I don't know. Then Brontosaurus, this was the biggest one when I was a kid, or so I thought. I heard lots about Brontosaurus. How many of you heard about Brontosaurus in school? Wow. Some of you are dinosaurs too. No, I'm just joking. Brontosaurus didn't exist. There's no such thing as a Brontosaurus. The interesting thing is they taught kids, even till I came along, they were still teaching about Brontosaurus. And when they discovered there never was any such thing as a Brontosaurus, they didn't really bother telling anybody but the scientists, and they didn't seem to tell anybody else either. You say, what do you mean Brontosaurus didn't exist? Brontosaurus is actually an Apatosaurus with the head of a Chimaerosaurus. They put the head on the wrong animal. And because they found a different head with the body and put them together, they determined it's a different species. Brontosaurus never existed. But we all learned about him. We just never got told he wasn't really there. Oh, you know, this one's quite popular, not the little flying one up there, but Tyrannosaurus Rex. Oh my. You know, people are interested in this kind of stuff. Museums, people look at the bones. When I would fly in and out of Chicago, when I lived up in Michigan and I drive over, they had, I don't think it was the real dinosaur bones. In fact, I'm quite certain it wasn't. It was replica. But this dinosaur and the ceiling, it went, you know, I walk up there and the leg bone just keeps going way up above my head. And I'm like, man. It made me think of when I was a kid and I used to watch the Star Trek movies and they had these big machines and sometimes they'd step on people. This thing ever stepped on you, that's it. You're gone. And then Jurassic Park was a huge hit, you know, dinosaurs eating people because somehow they found some DNA. Well, folks, they may have dinosaur DNA today now. Because did you know they're now finding soft tissue at times in the center of dinosaur bones that they say are 65 million plus years old? Soft tissue, 65 million, I don't buy it. I know it's soft tissue, I just don't 7 million years old. We'll talk about that. What about all this, the earth is that old and the different dating systems? We're going to get into it. And this snake ate baby dinosaurs. Isn't that cool? You wouldn't think of a snake eating baby dinosaurs, but the fossil remains, it seems to have been in the process of eating baby dinosaurs. Okay, great. That's kind of cool. Dinosaurs' oldest relative found. The BBC reports on March 4th of this year. It's in the news all the time, whether you pay attention to it. It's a huge, popular thing. Scientists have discovered a dinosaur-like creature 10 million years older than the earliest known dinosaurs. Okay, so it's dinosaur-like, 10 million years older than the earliest dinosaurs. How do they know? We'll talk about that. Bird from dinosaur theory of evolution challenged. How many of you have heard that birds came from dinosaurs? Now they're saying some dinosaurs may have come from birds. February 10th, 2010. Switching the theory around on us. I wish they'd make up their minds. It'd be much easier to argue against a real argument. But when they keep moving, it's hard to hit them. Kind of like a moving target. You ever try to shoot a deer standing still or shoot it running? It's a lot easier to hit one if you just stand still. They won't stand still. They keep changing the theories. Fox News, December 5th, 2009. That's not too old. 65 million years after they ruled the planet, dinosaurs are back. A new 4-part miniseries on the Discovery Channel peels back the millennia and the skin, revealing a never-before-seen look at the birth and death of dinosaurs. Down here, they got more information about tendons, muscles, and more. Notice down at the bottom, dinosaur science really evolves on an annular basis. So much changes year after year. Well, if it changes that much, how do you know that what you know now is right? Here's another one. This is so sad. Fox News, March 5th. Two small, gone long YK dinosaurs struggled to escape a muddy pit in what is now China during the late Jurassic period. Following in a giant dinosaur's footsteps could be fatal. What happened is a bigger dinosaur came along, and where he stepped made a big hole. And these two little dinosaurs were following in the big one's footsteps and got stuck. Mysterious death pits holding the fossil skeletons of nearly 24 small dinosaur species may actually be the 160-million-year-old footprints of an ancient behemoth. Okay. Here we have it. Giant sea monster skull found in England. This is recent as well. Dinosaur experts in Dorset, England are examining the fossilized skull of a sea monster so large they say it could have eaten a Tyrannosaurus Rex for breakfast. Now that might make a movie there. The fossil head is 8 foot long, suggesting that the beast measured up to 54 foot from the tip of its massive crocodile-like snout to the end of its muscular tail, making it one of the largest specimens ever found. The skull belongs to a plesiosaur, one of a group of giant aquatic reptiles, which roamed the warm seas over what is now southern Britain 150 million years ago. That's what they say. Fox News. This is January 28th, 2010. That's an AP photo. A rendering shows a single, I'll mess up. I practiced that word, but I still mess it up, sporting its orange and white striped tail. Scientists have for the first time confirmed color in a dinosaur. Have you ever wondered what color they are? Scientists have for the first time confirmed color in a dinosaur. Don't think purple Barney, but reddish-orange Conan O'Brien. That's got to make you laugh right there. The first solid proof of pigmentation has been spotted in the fossilized tail feathers of a smallish, meat-eating dinosaur found in China. The creature seems to have russet-colored rings, according to a paper published online Wednesday in the journal Nature. New York Times. Dinosaur find takes scientists beyond bones. March 25th, 2005. But now, how old? 70-million-year-old Tyrannosaurus Rex, discovered in Montana, has apparently yielded the impossible. Is that what it says? No. It says the improbable. It's the impossible, though. If it was 70 million years old. Scientists reported yesterday what? Soft tissues, including blood vessels and possibly cells lining them that retain some of their original what? Flexibility, elasticity, and resilience. That's why I say they may have dinosaur DNA now. That's just interesting. They made a boo-boo. Well, actually, they decided to do it, but it was something that was uncommon. To make it easier to get this bone out of a Tyrannosaurus Rex leg bone out, they cut it. To get it out of the wilderness, they cut it into a smaller piece. Now, you would never cut a dinosaur bone. They're kind of like a unrenewable resource. But they cut the bone. And when they cut into the bone, they found soft tissue. So then they drilled into some other dinosaur bones, and guess what they found in some other ones? Soft tissue. This is interesting. Bone marrow found intact in ancient fossils. Scientists have extracted intact bone marrow from the fossilized remains of 10-million-year-old frogs and salamanders. They weren't that old. Who are you kidding? We wouldn't still have bone marrow that's intact that long. The finding detailed in the August issue of the journal Geology is the first case of fossilized bone marrow ever to be discovered, and only the second report of fossilized what? Fossilized soft tissue. In June of 2005, scientists announced they had found preserved red blood cells from a Tyrannosaurus Rex leg bone. It pushes back the boundary for how far soft tissue fossilization can go, said study leader Maria McNamara of University College Dublin in Ireland. Now, they're playing a word game in this article. And the reason they are is they're saying, well, this is fossilized, the 10-million-year-old bone marrow. Okay? Maybe the bone marrow fossilized. But my friends, fossilization takes place when the organic material is replaced by inorganic material, by minerals, and it hardens. They're playing a word game here, whether the lady realizes they are or not, or care. I don't know if that's a care than is a guy or a girl. There's a word game going on here. Because this soft tissue in the Tyrannosaurus Rex leg bone was not fossilized, because if it was fossilized, it could not have been elastic. It would have been mineral. Do you find minerals that harden, it just stretch like an accordion? No. So what happened to the dinosaurs? Well, they figured that out the last couple of weeks, finally. Or so they say. Thursday, March 4th, 2010. Dinosaur extinction linked to crater is confirmed. Now we know it for a very questionable non-fact. BBC News reports an international panel of experts has strongly endorsed evidence that a space impact was behind the mass extinction that killed off the dinosaurs. They reached the consensus after conducting the most wide-ranging analysis yet of the evidence. Writing in Science Journal, they rule out alternative theories such as large-scale volcanism, which doesn't mean Star Trek and Spock is killing everything, but rather volcanoes. The analysis has been discussed at the 41st Lunar and Planetary Science Conference in the U.S. All right. Now, Science News. Asteroid killed off dinosaurs, says International Scientific Panel. This is this year. Here's you another report. The extinction of the dinosaurs has often been traced to a giant space rock impact on Earth 65 million years ago. But now a scientist is saying experts have blamed the wrong impact. The new thinking was met with sharp criticism from other researchers, however. It continues on. So, okay, so it was destroyed. It was destroyed because there was an asteroid hit, just the wrong asteroid. Sounds like they really got this figured out. Other guy goes, no, it's the asteroid I found. That's the one that, no, it's the asteroid I picked. And so, they say here, a giant basin in India called Shiva could also be an impact crater from the time of the dinosaurs' demise, and the crash that created it may have been the cause of the mass extinction. Scientists call the KT, Cretaceous Tertiary Event, which killed off more than half the Earth's species along with the dinos. This argument runs counter to the widely held wisdom that the Chicxulub impact on the Yucatan Peninsula off Mexico was behind the cataclysm. This is interesting. Some of his fellow scientists are skeptical, though. The cause of the dinosaurs' demise is far from an open and shut case. Though many experts support, it mentions the other theory again, some question whether the extinction was caused by an impact at all, and suggest that climate changes and volcanism were responsible. One line of reasoning holds that all three phenomena were to blame. Okay. They figured it out now. It is official. We know exactly what killed the dinosaurs. We know exactly that we don't know. I think we know. I think when you're saying you think the dinosaurs were killed by the flood, huh? Is that what you would say, Brother Lester? Yes, I would. Those that were still alive when the flood took place that may not have been on the boat. Because that's what happened to all the other animals that were living on earth at that time. Yes or no? I believe that when they went missing out of the geologic record took place at the flood because you have articulated fossils sometimes in the geologic record. Furthermore, you have dinosaur graveyards. We're going to talk about those in a minute. Here's your one. February 6, 2010. This is this year again. China dinosaur footprints. Scientists in China say they've discovered more than 3,000 dinosaur footprints, all facing the same way. Does that seem odd? They have some reasons for this. The footprints, thought to belong to at least 6 dinosaur types, were found in eastern Shandong province. Experts believe the prints are more than 100 million years old and say they could represent a migration or a panicked attempt to escape predators. Yeah. They might also, can't prove it, but can't disprove it either, might also represent a panicked attempt to get away from the wave of water headed their way. 3,000 dinosaur footprints all going the same way. Dinosaurs are often displayed in museums as an out. This is all the stuff that's been in just the last couple of years, folks, that we're talking about here. Dinosaurs are often displayed in museums as an outstanding proof of evolution, when in fact they're no proof at all. Number one, they were all distinct species with no evidence they were evolving. Number two, their sudden disappearance from our planet cannot be explained by evolutionary theories. You say, well, you just explained it with evolutionary theories. It was either climate change or volcanic activity or an asteroid or something else. That's the point. You can't explain it. You don't know which it was. You can't say that. Number three, the fact that they collected together into dinosaur graveyards indicated they were drowned by the flood rather than dying afterward. Why? Do you think dinosaurs would say, look, I've enjoyed living in this life with you and all my other dinosaur friends. And so when you feel like you're facing your last days, there's this ridge over in what's going to one day be Arizona where they're going to build a road and you're going to be able to see all these bones right there from the road. And I want you to go there and die, and I'm going to too, and our bones will be together for all eternity. You think all the dinosaurs just picked a place to go die and have a dinosaur graveyard? Or did their carcasses have to be deposited there in some way? Think about it. Were dinosaurs on the ark? Some may have been. Sure, that's possible. How many species had to be on the ark? And was there enough room? These are things that we'll talk about more when we get into Noah's Ark and Secrets of the Flood. It is really the pivotal event as to whether you're just going to believe you're here because of a creator somewhere that did something or biblical creation. The flood is the issue. The flood is the crux. Icons of old age, oil. This will be a shorter one. Sinclair motor oil. Notice what they started out with. Mellowed how long? Can you see the fine print? 100 million years. Wow. That must be some good oil. Is oil like wine, better with age? I don't know. Well, then, it changed to 80 million years. That's just 20 million years. That's no big deal. So how old is the oil? I sat down beside, when I was doing a series in Odessa, Texas, where our previous president built his wealth in Odessa and Midland with the oil out there, right? I sat down beside an oil man when I was doing a seminar out in Odessa, Texas. Man, you couldn't want to go there for any reason but for oil, I'll tell you that. It is desolate and dry. But the people there are there, they choose. It's a free country. They don't have to live there. They choose to, so don't pick on somebody's town. Everywhere you go in America, don't pick on the town. The people are there because they want to be, or they'd move. They want to be there. I don't know why, but I didn't tell them that. I'm talking to this oil man at a restaurant one day, and so I asked him, well, how did it get down? Well, it was, it can be dinosaurs and living materials, and it's down under the earth and the heat, and over millions of years it forms into oil. Like, okay. So, well, those cows out there in that field, if they all drop dead today, let's say there's 75 out there in that big old field, if they all drop dead today, are they going to turn into oil? He said, well, of course not. Why not? Well, they're going to decompose, and the buzzards and scavengers may eat them. I said, well, what if they got buried? Would they turn into oil? No, not likely. They just rot. And said, so to have oil, you got to have a lot of material buried, like a massive amount. Yeah, and then it's got to be way down under the ground. Yeah? How did it get there? If your testimony is that when an animal dies, it's going to decompose, dinosaurs that would have just died like any other animals, most of them would have been eaten by other ones. Plants that died, they would have decomposed naturally on the surface of the earth like other plants do. Why do they turn into oil and coal? And we got to the point he finally admitted something cataclysmic had to bury all that stuff. That those layers of the geologic column, there's no way that they could have formed slowly over millions of years because things would have decayed naturally and not turned into oil and coal. The oil man sitting beside me at lunch in Odessa, Texas. USA Today, killing germs, reducing waste, making oil. This is from January 23, 2004. This was going to be a column about oil. Instead, it's also about disease, poison, and a cool way to get rid of both. Actually, it's about a new technology, a new process that's going to make a difference, one that's going to change things, and one you're going to be hearing a lot more about. Continues on, and it says here, specifically, TDP turns just about anything into what? Say, I can't see it. Well, that's why we reserve, you can sit up front if you come early. You can bring binoculars if you want to. There's only so much you can do with these articles. Into oil. Anything into oil and fertilizer. And when I say anything, I mean that. Animal waste, medical waste, human waste, used diapers, used computers, used tires, anything that's not radioactive can be tossed into the hopper. Those things go in one end of the process and come out the other end as diesel oil and fertilizer using a process that mimics the Earth's. But instead of taking millions of years to turn plants, dinosaurs, and what have you into Venusian crude, TDP takes hours to do the same to just about anything you can throw in it. So it would have taken God or the earth millions and millions and millions of years to make this stuff, but now we can make it in a few hours. But God couldn't have done it any quicker than millions of years. Come on. Who are you kidding? In 1996, a $22.4 million proposal was approved in Western Australia that will build a plant that will create oil from sewage sludge in 30 minutes. Man, from sewage sludge. People getting rich from sitting on the pot. That's amazing. Make it oil! Honey, what you getting up out of bed for? I'm going to make some money, baby. I'll be back in a minute. Oh my, bad news. Discover article, Anything into Oil, Volume 24, May 2003. The process is designed to handle almost any waste product imaginable, including turkey offal, tires, plastic bottles, harbor-dredged muck, old computers, municipal garbage, corn stalks, paper, pulp, effluent, infectious medical waste, oil refinery residues, even biological weapons such as anthrax spores. According to a pail, waste goes in one end and comes out the other as three products, all valuable and environmentally benign: high-quality oil, clean burning gas, and purified minerals that can be used as fuels, fertilizers, as I mentioned fertilizer in the other one, or specialty chemicals for manufacturing. Get this. Do we have anybody here that weighs, any man, about 175 pounds? I run about 205, 210. I'm tall. Do we have a man that weighs about 175 pounds? Any man? I see your hands. About 175 pounds. Okay. One here, one here. Okay, y'all will be our examples. If a 175-pound man fell into one end, he would come out the other end as 38 pounds of oil, 7 pounds of minerals, as well as 123 pounds of sterilized water. There you go. Well, that's better than folks previously thought people were worth. 38 pounds of oil. That might get you to Branson and back. I don't know how it turns into gasoline as far as how much it equates to. But first things first. Today, here at the plant at Philadelphia's Naval Business Center, the experimental feedstock is turkey processing plant waste. Feathers, bones, skin, blood, fat, guts. A forklift dumps 1,400 pounds of the nasty stuff into the machine's first stage, a 350 horsepower grinder that masticates it into gray-brown slurry. From there it flows into a series of tanks and pipes, which hum and hiss as they heat, digest, and break down the mixture. 2 hours later, a white-jacketed technician turns a spigot. Out pours a honey-colored fluid, steaming a bit in the cold warehouse as it fills a glass beaker. And here it is. There's the process right there in Discover magazine. The grinder, and it goes through all of this, and what? Comes out oil over here. This is interesting. My clicker is deciding not to work right, so I'll use the other one. That's why we have two. Technology savvy could turn 600 million tons of turkey guts and other waste into 4 billion barrels of light Texas crude each year. Man. Drill here, drill now. Just eat more turkey. Dinosaurs, oil, petrified wood. You say, what was the point of sharing that about oil? They tell us the earth has to be billions of years old, millions and millions of years for oil to form. But if man can do it in 30 minutes or 2 hours, why do you think it would take God millions of years? Let's talk about petrified wood. Topping Mother Nature, lab makes petrified wood in how long? days. Researchers at a national science laboratory in south central Washington, this is USA Today. These aren't, fringe magazines, folks. Well, some of you call Fox News fringe. I think it's fair and balanced. Topping Mother Nature lab makes petrified wood in days. Researchers at a national science laboratory in south central Washington have found a way to achieve in days what it takes Mother Nature millions of years, converting wood to mineral. From phys.org.com, California has Silicon Valley. Could a silicon forest in Washington be next? A team of material scientists from Pacific Northwest National Laboratory is on it. Yongsun Shin and colleagues at the Department of Energy Lab have converted wood to mineral, achieving in days what it takes nature millions of years to do in such places as the Ginkgo petrified forest, an hour up the Columbia River. Their trees, likely felled in a cataclysmic eruption and buried without oxygen beneath lava, bleached out their woody compounds and sponged up the earth's soil's minerals over the eons. Petrified wood is a type of fossil in which the tissues of a dead plant are replaced with minerals, most often a silicate, like quartz. The petrification process occurs underground when wood or woody materials suddenly become buried under sediment. Mineral-rich water flowing through the sediment deposits minerals in the plant cells, and as the plant's lignin and cellulose decays away, a stone cast is left in its place. Shin's petrified wood journey began in a less dramatic fashion, a few minutes away at Lowe's. Shin's group reports in the current issue of the journal Advanced Materials in the do-it-yourselfer chain's lumber yard. There they picked up their raw material, pine and poplar boards. Back at PNNL, they gave a 1 centimeter cube of wood a 2-day acid bath, soaked it in a silica solution for 2 more. For best results, repeat this step up to 3 times. Sounds like a recipe. Air-dried it, popped it into an argon-filled furnace, gradually cranked up to 1400 degrees centigrade to cook for 2 hours, then let cool in argon to room temperature. Presto! Instant petrified wood! The silica taking up permanent residence with the carbon left in the cellulose to form a new silicon carbide, or SiC ceramic. The material replicates what? Exactly the wood architecture. So man, couple of days, make petrified wood, but God, it must have took him millions of years. I can't listen to it anymore. Icons of old age of the earth. The Grand Canyon, here we go. Have you been there? I've had opportunity to go there. I'm looking forward to going back and taking what's called a creationist tour of the Grand Canyon. There are many things in the Grand Canyon, including articulated skeletal remains. There are also shells of certain creatures that are only found in certain layers throughout the entirety of certain parts of the Grand Canyon. Very interesting. Now, here's the Grand Canyon, and you say, well, we just had an aerial view. Well, that's kind of from the air, but let's go way up in the sky. That's the Grand Canyon from way up high. Way up high, the edge of outer space. You know what the white stuff is? That's a cloud right there, but those aren't clouds. That's a cloud right there and there. But what is that? It's snow. What does that indicate? Why is there snow here, but not here and here? Elevation. The Grand Canyon is running along. The river enters at 2,800 foot. The peak is higher than the entrance. The peak up here where the snow is missing, where the river flows through, the peak is higher than the entrance by 4,000 foot. Rivers don't flow uphill. I learned that from my dad. Every good plumber knows that water runs downhill. There is no delta. Where did all that dirt go? Mississippi River has a delta. It's nowhere near deep as the Grand Canyon. Where did it all go? The river could not have made that canyon. In fact, say people go, oh well, it's been millions of years that river's been running down through that canyon. Is that the only river then that's that old? Is the Grand Canyon something that people fly here from Japan to go see? Yes or no? And China and Europe and other places? You know why? Because it's unique on the earth. It's an exception, not the rule. Yes or no? The Mississippi River, the Missouri River, they haven't made canyons like this, have they? And that river didn't make that canyon either. They saw over millions of years that river has eaten away, eaten away, eaten away. Baloney. You say, well, it flows right through there. Yes, but it starts here at 2,800 foot, and it gets up to 6,900 to 8,500 foot. It would have to run up the hill and back down for millions of years. It would have to run up the hill and back down for millions of years to erode to where it was even running downhill. That little river didn't make that canyon. It's the exception, not the rule, folks. Don't go give us an exception and say it's the rule. That's not good science, is it? You pick an exception and say, this is our example. Watch out. Check it out. The ground slopes up to the top of the Grand Canyon at 6,900 to 8,500 foot elevation. Colorado River enters the canyon 2,800 elevation and flows downhill. Okay. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of information on how something like this could happen. We're moving away from the Grand Canyon, a little farther north and a little farther west. When I was doing a series of meetings up in Washington State, actually I was staying in this was when I was doing it in Washington. I got confused because we did one in Portland, Oregon, and then we went back a few months later and did one right across in Vancouver, Washington, and they kind of grow together there. This was when I was in Washington, up above Vancouver there, in a little town up there. Ooh, the fishing was good up there. Man, I tell you what. Now, it's funny, my brother-in-law, he's a Yankee, and he's enough Native American, he has a place on a reservation, but he's blonde hair and blue-eyed. You explain that to me. My daughter thinks it's cool we go walking in the woods of Mississippi, and Uncle Jared's with us. We don't have to worry because he's a real Indian. He can take care of us. I like Jared. Great guy. And I said, I'll tell you what. That's what reminded me of Jared. Jared came down to Mississippi and got a job as he was seeing my sister. And he went to work doing construction. And in Mississippi, I don't know if they do it around here, but folks will go, well, I tell you what. That's just an expression. They ain't about to tell you nothing. It's just, man, I tell you what. And Jared comes down from New York, upstate New York, a full-fledged Indian Yankee. And he goes to work doing construction in South Mississippi, and them fellas would say, I tell you what. And Jared go, what? And this went on for a couple of days, and he thought they were messing with him, that they were picking on him. Woo, it's hot out here. I tell you what. He goes, what? Lord loves Yankees, and we have to try to. New answers for old mysteries. Up above Vancouver, Washington there, I went up to, what is that a picture of? Mount St. Helens. You say, we're not talking about the Grand Canyon? We are, but we're going to, this was a picture in the museum there, the little museum at Mount St. Helens when I went. I took this picture with my wife's fancy camera. Here is an illustration that they have. See, this was a volcano, but there was an explosion, and this whole side of the volcano blew off, and then it ran downhill. All of that formed real quick. Now, in our next session, we're going to talk about how logs, the debris went downhill into this lake called Spirit Lake. The water rushed up the hillside, brought logs back down, and they began to settle down into this sediment like we see at Specimen Ridge and some other places. We'll talk about that in our next session. But that's not the point. There's me at Mount St. Helens. I'm scared of heights. It was all I could do to lean against that bar for the picture. But I'm a man. I did it. Now, Mount St. Helens in Washington, USA, May 18th, 1980. Where I'm standing here, there's a building that would be to the left of me in the picture, And that's basically where the guy was at that was observing Mount St. Helens. They knew it was about to blow when it exploded. It didn't just erupt. It exploded. And it's miles away, and he was killed. They actually have the recording in there of his voice telling about it, and then the mountain is, as you can see in the picture, that's miles away. That mountain is huge. It was in the news again the other day. Somebody fell in a crate. They hadn't found him. I didn't follow it to see if they did. It's huge. Miles away, killed instantly. That's how big the explosion was. The blast zone killed all the trees for miles and miles. It did more than some nuclear weapons would do. Okay? This was it. Mount St. Helens in Washington, May 18th, 1980. The North Slope slid down the mountain. While the North Slope slid down the mountain, the volcano was uncorked, releasing the ash and steam. Boom! It exploded. Now, Mount St. Helens was small by volcano standards. Here's some volcanoes in the past. There's Mount St. Helens. A river system formed in 9 hours. The landslide of May 18th buried the river and highway to Spirit Lake to an average depth of 100 foot. So when you bury something to 100 foot, what happens to all the rivers, the branches, and all of the little streams? They got filled in. You want to see something interesting? It also buried most other drainages in the 23 square miles. Buried most other drainage, 23 square miles of the Upper Toutle Valley, and plugged the valley's mouth. For 22 months, water had no established path to the lower waterway of drainages, over which much of the valley, and reopened the way to the Pacific Ocean. The drainages included at least 3 canyons 100 foot deep. One was nicknamed the what? Little Grand Canyon of the Toutle, because it was a 1/40th scale model of the Grand Canyon. Now, folks, I ask you a question. Although the Grand Canyon is huge, this is a picture I took when I was there at Mount St. Helens. This is what they're talking about right here. 1,000 foot wide. Right there. Doesn't look like it, but that mountain is miles off. New canyon formed in a few hours by rapid water flow. It formed there, and it took months before it got all the way to the Pacific Ocean, worked out the new path. But that formed very quickly. Now, 1,000 foot wide, 140 foot deep. Once water starts to go over a dam, let's back up here a second. What you're looking at with the Grand Canyon, you say, Hiram, if you don't believe the river made the Grand Canyon because water doesn't flow uphill, what do you think caused it? I think it was drainage and runoff from the flood. That's what I think. And I think, quite frankly, that rock would not have been completely hardened necessarily. I don't know. But what I'll tell you is we know for a fact, scientists tell us, up above the Grand Canyon, there was a huge, massive, prehistoric lake. And guess what the dam of that lake was? That snow-capped ridge. Once water starts to go over a dam, notice what happens. Here it goes. Erosion rate increases rapidly. This little river, by the way, didn't make this canyon. You see that canyon? You see that little river flowing out of it? Did that river make that canyon? But if you walked up there today and thought that mountain always looked like that, wouldn't you assume that water had been running there for centuries and centuries and centuries? That's what would be logical to think. And so it's logical for people to think that river formed the Grand Canyon. It's just not true. This little river didn't make this canyon either. We'll talk about the geologic column, especially with the flood, in our next session. Icons of old age, we're going to cover one more. Talking about the ice core drillings in Greenland. Okay, the the U.S. National Ice Core Laboratory in Denver. Okay, let's move through this quickly. Ice core drillings in Greenland, 35,000 rings. They say, well, the Earth has to be 6,000 years. No way. A global flood? No way. No way. 35,000 rings, and those represent years. So 135,000-year-old ice Boy, you could drill down into that. That would be some fresh water. They say these layers represent annual rings because in summer the top layer of snow melts and refreezes as clear ice, which shows up dark here. In winter, the snow packs and shows up as a white layer. So they say, see, summer, winter, summer, winter, summer, winter. 135,000 rings. The earth is way, way older than that Bible says. But there were some airplanes that were landed there. And here was the crash site. It was a crash landing, okay, in Greenland. The planes landed in what year? 1942. This is the style of the plane. It was that, it had the two fuselages there, the wingspan that went across. I've seen those in a museum. Okay? They decided to go back and look for them years and years later. And they couldn't find them until they got some fancy machines, radar, and had pulled across, and they located them way, way, way down. The planes were covered in 263 foot of ice in 48 years. Ice rings in Greenland from the Lost Squadron. You see dark light, dark light, dark light all the way down that tunnel as they went down to get the plane? You see it? Well, that plane, according to the ice rings, count them up. Those planes that they landed there in 1942, in the 1990s when they got them out, according to the ice rings, had been there hundreds of years. It's the truth. Count up the rings. Hundreds of years since 1942. 1942 to 1990 is 48 years. The planes were 263 feet below the surface. That's about 5.5 feet a year. You say, well, what do you say about the dark and light? Dark and light. Folks, do you suppose if it's snow and then the sun comes out and warms up and then it refreezes and it snows again and the sun comes out and it warms up, that could happen every 2 or 3 days in certain times of the year, yes or no? I bet it happens around here. I heard this has been a real bad winter. I hadn't been around these parts all that long, but I hear bad winter. I've been up in Michigan, so bad winter, whatever. Deeper ice is pressed into finer layers, so 4,400 years, in other words, back to approximately the time of the flood, to accumulate the ice at the poles is no problem. See, the skeptics have said there's too much ice at the poles, there couldn't have been a flood a few thousand years. Baloney. Planes from 1942 were under 263 foot of ice. The ice rings, if that is an accurate way of aging the earth, prove it to be hundreds of years since 1942 to 1990. So what about radiocarbon and radiometric dating? Well, carbon-14 and radiocarbon dating, as bone and other material becomes older, the amount of carbon-14 contained in it diminishes. Plants get C14 from the atmosphere. Animals get it from plants. When an organism dies, it no longer acquires new carbon, and the amount of C14 begins to decrease. When measuring the amount of C14 remaining in the specimen, the amount of time it has been dead can often be measured accurately up to several thousand years. However, nobody tries to carbon date anything over 70,000 years old. There wouldn't be enough left. So if they say it's a really old specimen, it's not worth checking. Carbon-14. However, living snails in Nevada give apparent ages of 27,000 years. Escargot. Aquatic mosses now living in Iceland date around 6,000 to 8,000 years old. Most living marine samples from the oceans date at least several hundred years old. The scalp of a frozen musk ox from Alaska dated 24,000 years old, while its hair dated 17,000 years old. Now, 24 and 17, 7,000 year difference. That's why he died. He froze to death before his hair grew. Taken from Origins, Linking Science and Scripture, page 247. Assumptions determine conclusions. If the assumptions are not valid, the conclusions will be wrong. When I was doing meetings in Fairplain, Texas, suburban area outside of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, had a double E come into my meetings. You know what a double E is? Electrical engineer. And when I got to this point, he let out a gasp. He'd been all the way through the educational system and started believing all the evolutionary stuff, but he had never been told that there were any assumptions that carbon-14 testing was based on. They start telling you about the dating system, say, what are the assumptions being made? Because assumptions determine conclusions in scientific settings, yes or no? It is assumed that the amount of C14 in the atmosphere has remained constant. In other words, all things continue as they were since the beginning of creation. That's the assumption that it's based on. It's based on a prophecy of scoffers in the last days, denying the flood. My friends, the amount of C14 in the atmosphere would have changed drastically in the specimens that predate the flood, if the earth had a different type of atmosphere that did not produce rainbows and that the earth was watered by a mist. Don't have time to explain why that's the case, but that's the case. Creationists answer a different atmosphere with some type of water canopy, possibly before the flood, that did not produce rain would mandate less C14 in the atmosphere prior to the flood. If the biblical record is true, and it is, one would expect that all specimens that predate the flood would test much older than they actually are. 11 samples. Now, we're going to talk about dating the rocks. Any of you ladies ever dated a rock? Dating the rocks. 11 samples taken from a mountain in New Zealand. A book titled Thousands, Not Billions. Radioisotopes in the Age of the Earth. The acronym for the RATE project. You see, they don't claim to be able to date sedimentary rock. Why? Because sedimentary rock is made up of sediments that are older than the rock itself. They claim to only be able to date igneous rock, or rock that formed through heated processes. So, volcanic rock is a prime example. So they went to where eruptions had taken place, and they got a sample from an eruption on February 11th, 1949, so they knew how old that rock was. Then an eruption from the 4th of June, 1954, and they knew how old that rock was. They knew the birthday of the rock because of the volcanic activity. Then a sample from the 30th of June, 1954, from the 14th of July, 1954, and from the 19th of February, 1975, and they sent it in, and they gave the lab a hint. They said, we have reason to believe that these rocks are relatively young. Blind test. Dates given from potassium-argon dating. As the potassium, the K breaks down to the argon, or the AR, the Geochron Laboratory, Cambridge, Massachusetts. What happens is potassium, as it decays, it turns into argon. So what they do is they assume there's no daughter element, argon, in the sample, and that it's all potassium. And so the amount of potassium, based on the comparison to how much argon is there, determines how old the rock is, how much it's decayed, based on the half-life of the potassium. And so they said of these samples, let's back up because I talked too much and I lost your attention. 1949, 1954, 1954, 1954, 1975. In other words, there are several of you in the room older than these rocks. Dates given from potassium-argon dating, the Geochron Laboratory, Cambridge, Massachusetts, they said 4 were less than 270,000 years old. They hit the nail on the head. They were less than 270,000. That right there can build your confidence in science. All of those rocks were less than 270,000 years old. They were barely 50 years old, some of them. Perfect. One was less than 290,000 years old. One, well, they miss it here, is 800,000 years old. 3 samples, they took multiple samples at these different sites, were 1 million years old. One was 1.2 million, one was 1.3, one was 1.5 million, and one was 3.5 million. They really started missing it there. None of them were really much older than 50, 60 years old at the time. Okay, now, check this out. In every case, the dates were off by nearly 250,000 to 3.5 million years. Margin of error, 7 million%. When they told the lab this, they said, no, that's not right. You can't do that. Can't do what? You can't send us rocks you know the age of. It only works on old rocks. Actual age, 50 years old. Lead dating said the rock was 3.9 billion years old. That is a discrepancy of 7.8 billion%. Think about this. Assumptions determine conclusions. If the assumptions are not valid, the conclusions will be wrong. 3 assumptions of potassium-argon dating: no existence of the daughter element, which is argon, at the formation of the rock. Who's to say the rock couldn't have formed with some argon in it? They assume it's in a closed system. In other words, it's never been contaminated. Hello, rocks are outside. Things get contaminated outside. 3, they've assumed the rate of decay has always been the same. Can you assume that the rate of decay has always been the same on planet Earth if Earth has had different types of atmosphere? Does the atmosphere in your refrigerator affect the decay rate of things you put into it? None of these assumptions are valid, and none are able to be subjected to the scientific method of observation and reproducible experimentation. There's no way to accurately date anything beyond several thousand years. That means the Earth could be quite young, and no scientist can absolutely prove otherwise. That's the point. Let's say I got up here tonight, and I said, I have a yardstick tonight. This is my yardstick, and I hold it up, and it's this long. Can that be a yardstick? Why not? Because the yardstick's how long? 36 inches, 3 foot. That's right. That's a yardstick. I say, no, my yardstick is this long. You say, that's about 6 foot long. Lay it down here. You say, come out here. There's some tile out here somewhere that are 1 foot tile. Lay down your yardstick beside these tile. They're actually 1 foot each, and we can, a 1 foot square tile, and we'll see how many tile it is. We'll know if it's a real yardstick. Say, no, you can't test my yardstick. My yardstick is this long, and it's a yardstick. But it doesn't work on short measurements like those tiles on the floor. My yardstick only works on very long measurements. You want to measure from here to Pluto and back? You want to measure from here to the nearest star and back? You use my yardstick. But my yardstick don't work on those short measurements. If your yardstick is wrong on short measurements, it's way off by the time you start doing long measurements, yes or no? And so, according to the postmodern evolutionary worldview, that the prehistoric creatures that were real simple down here evolved and became all these others, and then the dinosaurs lived, and then here we are at the very top. With that idea, then death appears in the geologic column before human sin. But the Bible tells us the wages of sin is death. Wherefore, as by one man sin entered the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. Romans 5. 1 Corinthians 15, 21 and 22. For since by man came death, by man came also the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, even so in Christ shall all be made alive. Adam's sin also affected the plants and animals, as we see in Genesis 3, 17 through 19. Cursed is the ground for thy sake, thorns and such came forth. And, of course, all creation groans now under the weight of sin in Romans chapter 8. Without God's flood, you have death in the geologic column before human sin. Why? Because without God's flood, if this stuff formed slowly over millions of years, and that is a record of time, then you had all these animals that lived before humans appeared here at the top. Then there would be no causal connection between sin and death. The wages of sin could not be death then. Christ's death would not be the wage of our sins, and the atonement would be nullified. However, prior to the flood, you wouldn't have a geologic column, at least in the sense that we do today, full of specimens of fossils of creatures that had already died. You would have all the animals living on the earth, And some of them were drastically different sizes than what we have on the earth today. Yes or no? You not only have giant dinosaurs, some people make a case that there are still living dinosaurs. They're called reptiles today. I don't know. That's not really my area. But what I will tell you is that they used to have some turtles and other animals, even these little bitty badgers and different things that were absolutely huge. And then you have the flood producing the column. The dead forms are entombed in the geologic column after human sin. There's a causal connection between sin and death that is real. Christ's death is the wage of our sins, and the atonement is preserved. Creation is a must, and the issue of creation in the flood, some people say, how big a deal is it? Hiram, what do you think, Brother Esther? How big a deal is this? You know, as Christians, sometimes we don't want to make controversy over smaller issues. Obviously, in the Christian world, there are some issues that are bigger than others, yes or no? For instance, 10 Commandments. Would that be a big deal? Yes. Okay? There's plenty of big deals. But we know that the death, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Big deal, yes or no? Yes. What about this issue? The whole theory of evolution, that this column formed slowly over millions of years and then that humans came along relatively soon, puts death millions of years before its biblical cause, which is sin. And the underlying issue is not only does it undermine the authority of the Bible in Genesis, but it undermines the necessity of the atonement of Jesus Christ. Now, I used to believe theistic evolution. I didn't realize that my belief in theistic evolution was undermining the importance of the death of Jesus. But that's precisely what it was doing. The geologic column, with God's flood producing the geologic column, the atonement is preserved. This shows why the global flood is so important to our understanding of salvation. Matthew 24:38 and 39, for as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, unto the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Now let's look at this, folks. You've got 3 special messages in Revelation. I'm going to show you Revelation's outline of Genesis. Revelation 14:7, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to Him, for the hour of His judgment is come, and do what? Worship Him that made heaven and earth and the sea. Stop right there. We'll save and the fountains of waters for next. Worship Him that made heaven and earth and the sea. What is that talking about? Creation. Revelation's outline of Genesis, you have creation. Worship Him that made heaven and earth and the sea. Then you have the fountains of waters. Is that what it said next? Fountains of waters. What broke up? The rain came from up there, but what came from down below? In the days of the flood, it says the fountains of the deep broke up. Yes or no? And in the Septuagint, which is the Old Testament, translated by Hebrews into Greek from the Hebrew, it's the same root word that's used for the fountains that broke up in the days of Noah. Very interesting. And it says, fear God and give glory to Him, the hour of His judgment is come. Worship Him that made heaven and earth, the sea, and the fountains of waters. It mentions judgment. Was the flood a judgment because of sin? Yes or no? If God judged the world once because of sin, will He do it again? Yes. He is coming soon, and it says He's going to judge the quick and the dead at His appearing. The next verse, Revelation 14:8, and there followed another angel saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The word Babylon comes from the root word Babel, or some say Babel. The Tower of Babel is the next picture there, the Tower of Babel. Revelation 14:8, Babylon is fallen. It says there the place was called Babel because in Genesis 11 it says there God confused the languages. It means confusion. Okay? And Abraham, right after that, is called out of the land of Ur, the Chaldeans. Geographically, look at your map. That was in the territory of Babylon. Abraham was called out of Babylon, and the faithful in Revelation 18 are called out of Babylon, whatever that means in Revelation. Next, you have in Revelation 14:9 and 10, and the third angel followed them, saying with a what kind of voice? No, nothing like that. It was a loud voice. If any man worship the beast in his image and receive his mark in his forehead and his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out of that mixture into the cup of his indignation, and he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. Tormented with what? Fire and brimstone. Revelation 14 and verse 10. What was the next significant event? You have creation. Just a few chapters later, you have the flood. A few chapters later, you have the Tower of Babel. A few chapters later, you have Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed with fire and brimstone. Yes or no? Now, these are dealing with prophetic future events, but Genesis is the outline of Revelation's prophecies. This is huge. And then, Revelation 14:12, here are they that keep the commandments, and Genesis 26:5 tells us that Abraham kept God's commandments. Now, don't miss the significance of this. Skeptics today tell us creation didn't happen. They tell us the flood was local. They tell us the Tower of Babel is an old wives' tale. They tell us Sodom and Gomorrah, no, of course it didn't happen. Then from the time of Abraham on, aside from the miracles, they say biblical history is pretty accurate for the most part. More accurate than any other records we have. But they deny these stories on the screen. The importance of the future that God has planned for his people is based on these stories from Genesis that people that buy into evolution say didn't happen that way. Is it a big deal? It's huge. It is huge. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Jesus is coming soon, and I think this is an important issue for us to understand, to be ready when Jesus comes again. And if it's your desire to be ready when the Lord returns, as it